Hey, what's up? My name is Teemu Arina. I'm the curator of Biohackers Summit and host of the Biohackers Live Show. So today we are diving deep into productivity and how you can build something called an external brain. And this is something that is very close to my heart. As you know, in the Biohackers Handbook, we have the work chapter, and we touch a bunch of different time management techniques and how you can think about your productivity in new ways. But my guest today is Boomer Anderson, who is a performance advisor and partner at Decoding Superhuman. He also has an amazing podcast if you're interested in well-being and how to take all of that to a new level. Boomer is also going to Biohacker Summit. He will be speaking. So his topic is the same that we're going to be touching into. Oh, my audio is occasionally. Okay, I'm going to monitor it myself. Um, just a second here. Yeah, I hope the audio will be fine from now on. Anyway, so let's get back to the topic. So developing an external brain for better performance. And Boomer is a top specialist when it comes to holistic health and nutrition, and also how you can take epigenetics into account. But we're going to be diving deep into productivity today. And if you're coming to Biohacker Summit, it's our 5-year anniversary. We are organizing the Biohacker Summit for the 8th time, for the 5th year, and it will be the biggest production so far. And if you go to the website at biohackersummit.com, you can find more information about this event. There is about 15, 16 keynotes already booked for this event. Among them is Boomer Anderson, Max Lugavere, and one of the new people I just signed up is medical doctor Molly Maloof from San Francisco, a doctor who knows a lot about biomarkers and how to optimize your health based on your blood work. But also, she's a doctor who looks in a very holistic way on these things, has also contributed to a lot of the discussion around the use of psychedelics in medicine. We have Dr. Marcel Münster coming, who is creating and advising World Economic Forum on digital health topics, and especially around how we can avoid startup founders burning out doing the work that they love, which is a huge epidemic. So today's topic about productivity is definitely helping everyone who is pushing the boundaries, is trying to get things done, and is maybe struggling between the work amount and recovery and sleep and many other things because they don't necessarily manage themselves. So when you say that you don't have enough time, most likely what is going on is that you have time, but the way how you organize your life around the time available is not necessarily supporting what you try to achieve. And so when it comes to time management, that is one big topic when we talk about productivity. But with that, without further ado, let's invite Boomer on the show. Welcome, Boomer. How are you doing, man?
Tamu, it's so glad to be here. I'm a huge fan for a very long time, so it's an honor to be on the podcast.
Great. So you have a background in finance. So you were a top executive at an international bank, and you've been traveling all around the world. You've been helping to raise millions of dollars for different ventures. Can you tell me a little bit about that background and what made you shift your focus in life?
It's kind of a funny story, and I'll try and be brief because this could be long. But I've always been obsessed with this idea of performance, specifically, going back to as soon as my high school days, looking at athletics or academics and simply seeking to reach for more to perform better. That level or focus on performance brought me to Wall Street after graduating from university. When after a couple of years I was sent to Singapore, and interestingly enough, if I worked for a different bank it would have been a different story, but my boss left and at a very young age I ended up becoming head of a Southeast Asia financing desk for a bulge bracket investment bank. And that experience brought with it a lot of interesting things. I was with a team of 3 people covering 14 countries. We were helping everything from corporations to governments raise money. And over that period of time, I was constantly traveling. And that travel, being on the road, really just sort of piqued my interest in productivity. Like I said, I've been interested in performance forever. But in order to get the most out of a team, out of my person, out of myself, one of the things that I began to focus on was productivity and productivity theory. But needless to say, there's a story here because after 4 years of doing this job and traveling to over 40 countries, I was at this time exploring the realm of biohacking. And, for me, biohacking back then was, what do I do to feel good, do my job better, and really just perform better in workouts. And so what I was doing was I was ordering all these tests that were predominantly recommended by people like Tim Ferriss, etc. And so for my 30th birthday, and this kind of gets into the point where we switch to what I'm doing now. For my 30th birthday, I ordered what I called the kitchen sink of tests. I finally found this one doctor in Singapore who said, I know exactly what you're going through. I'm going to help you order all these tests that you want, et cetera, et cetera. These were things like advanced cholesterol tests, DEXA scans, but also a calcium score. And so what was interesting about that was at the age of 30, I got back a test that told me I had calcium in my heart.
Hmm.
And what that meant is that I was in the 95th percentile of risk for someone my age, for a cardiovascular event, that is. And so you can imagine being 30 years old and being faced with this information that you should potentially make some sort of change. And with that being said, what I did was I decided that rather than follow the traditional route, which was to diagnose, dismiss, and come back in 5 years, I wanted to unpack it. I wanted to fix it. And so I left my job in Singapore. I moved to one of my favorite cities in Europe and proceeded to unpack that, that disease. And as I began to improve my condition, as I began to improve myself, I began to focus better. I began to work better. I began to perform better in exercise. And as a result, former colleagues were asking me to help them. The former colleagues became clients. And that's really how the business got started.
Hmm. Okay, so it was your personal discovery that your lifestyle and your working life was not really supporting your long-term health, and it took you uh, to a position where instead of organizing things that are outside of you, you start organizing things also that are inside of you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that transformation, kind of the personal story here? Like, I guess, like noticing that you have a health condition that could potentially kill you is
Yeah,
already life changing as it is.
it is a little life changing, right? And so for me, this is a question I get asked all the time. How do you tackle this? Well, when I'm looking at something like cardiovascular disease in myself, there were a lot of obvious writings on the wall, Timu. And as I say these, please don't, frown too much and kind of laugh at me and be like, hey, you probably shouldn't have done that. But there are obvious things. I wasn't sleeping very much. From the age of 18 to 30, I slept about 4 to 6 hours a night. And couple that with the fact that I never really had a circadian rhythm from those years of 25 to 30, I was traveling all the time. It all starts to add up. And when it all starts to add up, it was then kind of lobbed on top of it a lot of exercise, too much exercise. And I thought I was healthy because I looked good. I was following whatever diet people recommended. These were things like the ketogenic diet, the paleo diet. I was vegetarian for a day. Uh, Basic things. And it was clear that what I was doing wasn't right for me. So as I began to reset, you start to look at what are the actual things that are right for you, what actually causes it to be right for you. And it requires looking really at the blueprint. And that's how we get into the story of how I found genetics. Observing that I'm an early morning preference person, living something like a late evening life was very interesting from a genetics perspective. We also looked at shifting my diet to something that was more monounsaturated fat focused. And this allowed me to really unpack this, bring down all of those known markers for cardiovascular disease, and allowed me to perform better.
Hmm. Right. So you got interested in epigenetics in addition to genetic tests. What can you tell me about optimizing kind of beyond your current biomarkers?
Beyond my current biomarkers. So
I'm
just
talking about
looking,
blood work, like, and the risk factors for cardiovascular disease, maybe that you measured for, and epigenetics is more about really kind of influencing your gene expression and using your genetic information to
yeah,
optimize your nutritional status and so on. So is that kind of the last mile that you got into?
that was one of that was actually really one of the starting points. Was when I had the genetics, I had the blueprint. I knew where I was supposed to be. Then I was comparing it to my current lifestyle, and I was identifying opportunities. These opportunities, the obvious ones, were, hey, get more sleep. It turns out I wasn't one of those 3% of the population that can get away with less than 6 hours of sleep per night. There's also things like looking at my diet and sort of tweaking diets and making sure that I wasn't eating as much saturated fat. So the genetics really are the blueprint that allowed me to guide lifestyle change. And of course, and I know that Chronomics and some other companies out there are doing epigenetic testing right now, where we're able to just sort of identify where we are in the sand versus population.
Right. I did also the Chronomics test recently at now age of 37, my biological age based on basically genome-wide analysis that takes into account not just telomere length, but the number of other factors shows that I'm 35. And I had a pretty much similar kind of busy life as you had, not in finance, but in the world of startups from the age of 20 to 30. And that led to a chronic health condition. It was stress related, and probably also a result of sleep deprivation, poor dietary choices. So I pretty much probably was accelerating my aging during those years. And in the last 7 years, I've been doing things that I don't have any data prior to age of
Mhm.
30 in terms of my longevity markers, but I'm pretty happy to see that um, I'm now aging slower than my chronological age. Now,
It's a great feeling, right?
it is, and it's very rewarding to feel that you have more energy. Also, to know that you can actually do something to these things,
Yeah.
and in the end, you get some of the things that you did wrong forgiven by your body, and it can really improve in terms of the condition. So what I learned from Dr. Tom Stubbs, and we did a live show with him. The recording is also available on the Biohacker Summit Facebook page. Is that things like early exposure to tobacco smoke or industrial um, kind of cities and urban
Mhm.
cities where you have a lot of pollution. In my case, I'm in the 1 percentile of people, which is pretty much people who are living close to nature and so on, who are not exposed to these kind of factors in these times. So even though I've lived in urban cities, I visit them frequently, I can see it from my biological tests that it's not having that much of an impact, at least when it's compared to larger populations. So definitely these kind of things that you can't feel, you can't see them in your immediate kind of experience of being alive, can have a tremendous effect in a really deep cellular level and level of the DNA that you can optimize for. Now, you come from a background of being a vice president, top executive in a bank on the financial sector, and that world is like many other professions in modern time, is all about productivity. It's all about getting things done. And to me, it seems like there is a pretty unhealthy culture of productivity there, which is, or they call it high performance culture, and they're aiming for a high performance culture, but it's not a healthy high performance culture. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience in the particular bank you worked at? How did you see that? Like people really pushing the boundaries, thinking they are high performance and not really being?
Sure. So I'll share a little bit about my experience both in New York and Singapore, because I think both of those jurisdictions in particular tend to push the limits very, very high. And so let's talk about New York. That's where I did my analyst years in investment banking. Everything you've heard about being an analyst in investment banking is true. I've worked multiple days in a row. I've slept underneath my desk. I've spent most of my week in the office to the tune of 80 to 100 plus hours a week. That level of performance, especially at the analyst level, is you very quickly come to find that your performance dwindles. And so when we look at what my performance was, by the end of that particular week, I couldn't edit a pitch book. I couldn't do anything. My general cognitive capacity to apply myself was pretty low. I wasn't able to focus. I wasn't able to make right decisions. And this is something that we're going to talk about later when it comes to things like bandwidth poverty. And so fast forward to when I moved to Singapore. There you have a resource constraint. You don't have enough people to get what you need to get done, and you're expected to do what you need to do. And that resource constraint forces you to think differently, particularly in my case when I was on the road all the time. And so for me, what it enabled me to do being on the road was to apply a lot of these theories into my life and use them in a way that made my team as well as myself more effective.
Hmm. Right. So, uh, can you tell me a little bit about the ideas of being a high performer and a productive person in a typical corporation and where they go wrong?
Sure. And we work right now with a number of different high performing professionals. These are your entrepreneurs, technology companies, financial companies. These are CEOs and people who just generally have an ambition to do more. And if you think about where people start with productivity, they think that they're able to do so and so much. They're able to focus and get so much done throughout the day. And the traditional way to get more done is to expand your work hours. And that's generally what we see with the people that we work with. They're already working 10, 12, sometimes even 14 to 16-hour days easily. And what we see is that these people are trying to figure out why their memory isn't what it used to be, why they're unable to create something to perfection very quickly, and why they're not even able to sleep at night, which is really the generation of the external brain.
Right. So there's physiological effects that come to play. Now, all right, let's dive deeper into today's topic for developing an external brain for better performance. So, based on everything that you've learned, why do you find it important to have an external brain? Is this brain not enough?
It's a good question, right? And I think the term external brain, we're not talking about uploading our minds to a computer interface here. What we're talking about is giving you a resource to produce something called leverage. And let's go back to the people whom I've served. And these are, again, your entrepreneurs, CEOs, etc. what they face on a given day is stakeholders asking them for things. They face people demanding their time. They face a list of tasks that they need to get done in order to meet the next quarter's goals. And in order to get all of that done, what do? They expand out their time in the office. They expand their time that they're working. And so when they go home, there's a whole myriad of tasks that they don't even really tackle during the day, and they're not capturing them properly. And so when these guys wake up in the middle of the night and can't figure out why they can't get back to sleep, it's a lot of this sort of rumbling around your mind that you're not able to get things done.
Right. So there is several uh, things in the biohacking community that is thrown around as a solution to this. One of them is basically writing things down, so that
Mhm.
in the evening you just record all the loose thoughts that you have. So out of your mind gives you the peace so that you can rest. And the state in which you go to sleep is the state in which you wake up. So if you go to sleep worrying about your day, the moment when you wake up, that's still what's going on in your mind. Now, when you get those things out of your mind, and maybe you're grateful for the things that you achieved that day, that's kind of the beat at which you will wake up as well. So, what else could we do, like in terms of uh, not just having all those things circulating in our minds and occupying our attention, and things that we have completely ignored because we're so busy?
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about bandwidth poverty. Is that a term you're familiar with, Tamu?
Bandwidth poverty?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me.
So, bandwidth poverty, we're all familiar with time poverty, which means we just don't have time. We're hopefully not that familiar with monetary poverty, which means we don't have money. But bandwidth poverty is something that actually, I believe Science Magazine, and I'll send you the link afterwards, produced some research on it, and or at least reported on it. And bandwidth poverty is something that is very typical among that executive crowd. They get inundated with those tasks that I alluded to earlier. And all of a sudden, there's this experience of overwhelm where they cannot focus on anything else. And if they can't focus on anything else, then really they start making mistakes, memory. And so, bandwidth poverty, what we're talking about there is how do we escape it? And the external brain, simply put, it has really two components to it. The external brain is first, how do we relieve that anxiety and get you out of bandwidth poverty? And then second, how do we take you and give you leverage? And so when we're looking through the external brain and what we can do, we start with a little bit of something that you may be familiar with, which is one of the initial strategies from David Allen's Getting Things Done. And what we're doing there is we're emptying the mind. We're emptying the mind on a piece of paper or your secretary or your app, your to-do list app, if you will. And so what we're doing is we're carving out dedicated time to get what's in our brain into some sort of storage service. And that storage service, in a way, serves a lot like your journal, except for it's an active storage bank that you're able to really recall and use going forward.
Right. So, okay. Uh, David Allen's Getting Things Done. So that could be one of the solutions here. Now, there's several others that we can also dive deeper into, but the idea that you have a to-do list. In David Allen's work, you're basically splitting that up into buckets. So there is buckets for things that require immediate attention, and there are buckets for things that you can postpone, or things that you need to delegate, and things that you're waiting for someone else to complete. So kind of organizing things based on the context instead of project. I mean, you have projects also as one bucket, but in the end, the idea is that most tasks are too big. So your task might be to record this podcast, but that's not really the task. The task can be split into so many multiple steps that lead into actually recording and live streaming this podcast. So splitting it up helps you to pay attention to the things that are really involved in doing it. So if you need to change your tires, it's not that you have just that, but you have basically get your car, drive to a place where it can be done, change the tires, get a replacement car maybe in meanwhile, and then drive it back home once you get the notification that it's done. Now it can be split up further. Now another way to think about it is that you should also have not to-do lists. So becoming conscious about things that you shouldn't be doing, and becoming conscious about the things that you want to be doing. And one thing that I like to add here is, in addition to a not to-do list, is a to-be list. So things that you want to become as a human being, so that you pay attention to things in terms of tasks that are actually helping you to develop, and not just get into the hamster wheel, doing the same thing over and over again, but that you're actually improving and maybe doing the things that you enjoy. So would you agree on this?
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something that's very important. The general to-do list is useless. And yes, I did just say before that you should dump your entire brain into a to-do list. Let me expand a little bit on that. So if your to-do list is worthless, how do we transform it into something that is of use? You've mentioned it already. And that is really taking it and making it into a next actions list. And so rather than saying, hey, I want to read War and Peace, I want to read Atlas Shrugged, and I want to read some sort of religious text that's well over 1,000 pages, well, that's not realistic. And those items sort of linger on that to-do list to making it a little bit worthless. And so why don't we just reframe those into next actions, which is read 10 pages of War and Peace, read 5 pages of Atlas Shrugged, read however many pages, etc. And so by framing those into next actions, you can actually put it into something that's useful to you. The other thing that I like, and this requires looking at a task manager that is a little bit better than most of them out there. And Teemu, I'm sure you have experience with this. There's thousands of task managers out there.
Yeah.
And
So tell me about some of your favorite ones.
Sure. So when we look at task managers, let me talk about the why in terms of why I recommend the ones that I do. When we look at task managers, what I'm looking for is the ability to add quickly. I want it to be accessible across platforms. So that could be Mac, PC, iPhone, Android, as well as Windows Phone. God help you if you have one of those. But looking at just the ability to go across platform, add quickly, but also prioritize and add tags. And prioritizing and add tags allows me to manage for my cognitive capacity on any sort of given day. And so when I look at those tags and the tags that I particularly want to add to everything, it's things like I'm tagging for difficulty. Is it easy, average, or challenge? I'm tagging for the time that it's going to take. Is it going to take 10 minutes or less, or is it going to take 30 minutes or 60 minutes plus? I'm tagging for the location. Where am I able to actually get this thing done? Is it online? Is it Amazon? Is it in Helsinki, Finland on November 1st and 2nd? What's my priority here? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? 1 being my highest priority. And then I'll also add a tag for some days or waiting for, just because it allows me to track things that I'm waiting for other people. And then finally, I'll add tags to really put things and classify them into projects. And this gets to my last sort of recommendation as to how you should select your to-do list. Being able to organize your to-dos by project and category allows you to be a lot more effective in what you're getting done. And so with that in mind, there's a few to-do lists out there that work really well. The one that I use is Todoist, and that's because I have an Android phone. Things works very well if you have iOS. There's other ones like AnyDo, which you have to do a little bit of more customization for when it comes to building something like an external brain. But these two in particular are very effective for what we're trying to accomplish when we're creating an external brain.
Right. I actually also use Todoist. I also
Nice.
had previously used Things. I thought Things is also pretty good. But Todoist is even better because of the integrations and the APIs that you can have, so
Absolutely.
that you can kind of circle around the different tasks into different systems. Now, I've used other tools also like Asana, and bunch of other methods for recording tasks. But in the end, Todoist has been pretty useful. Also, I like the mobile apps are pretty good.
Yeah.
I use that together with Rescue Time that tracks my usage of time at a computer. And on Rescue Time, you have a function called Focus Time that basically is kind of one way to set up a Pomodoro technique.
Yep.
So if you want to have 20 minutes of uninterrupted time working on something specific and you wouldn't be going to social media while you do that, I would turn on the focus time on Rescue Time so that I can, do anything else but what I'm supposed to be doing. And it also records that as focus time that I was trying to achieve for. So it blocks out my access to the things that I've categorized and figure out to be distractive to my work. Now,
Mhm.
do you also use something like Pomodoro or some other techniques to kind of then
Yeah.
actually do the things that you do?
Let's talk about those techniques because there's what I use and then there's what our ideal client is able to use. I think they're both very important. So I use a combination of something called deep work as well as the Pomodoro technique. And I'll define both here in a second. But let's look at what an executive's lifestyle is like. They wake up every day, they probably have a couple of kids that they need to get to school. They already are getting emails very early in the morning. They need to they need to answer those emails and be really respondent to these key stakeholders, but the question is how frequently. And so we just mentioned two different techniques here. There's deep work and then there's Pomodoro, and I actually think that the two are pretty related. And so deep work was popularized by Cal Newport in his book of the same name, but it looks at carving out large blocks of time to focus on what matters to you most. Now, there's people throughout history who are very famous for doing this, but the sort of corollary or correlation to that is the Pomodoro technique. And this one was actually developed by a guy who found an Italian tomato, or sorry, a tomato timer, and built out essentially interval training for productivity. And so rather than having 3+ hours of just dedicated space to do work, you're having 25 to 30-minute sprints. I bring both of those up because in the life of an executive where you don't really have much time, the Pomodoro technique can be very, very effective. You just block out whether it's 25-minute Pomodoros or even 45 or up to 90-minute Pomodoros and really just work your day through that. You can actually schedule meetings inside of Pomodoro. You can do a lot of work inside of Pomodoros. Myself, I like to use deep work first thing in the morning and then a series of Pomodoros later on in the day. But you mentioned time management, and I think because you mentioned it, you got me really excited because have you ever seen one of these? This is a device called the Timular. Are you familiar with it?
Timular? Uh, how do you spell that?
It's Timeular.
Okay, I don't know about that. What I
So
use for my kind of interval workouts or work hours is something called Pomodon app. Pomodon app integrates with Todoist
mhm.
and a bunch of other tools, and it's something that I use to schedule my intervals. And it's what it also does when I get away from my computer or I'm not touching anything for a while, it also asks me what I've been up to. And so then I can record also, for example, that I had a meeting or uh, I went for lunch and other things that then end up into kind of the digital footprint of what I've been up to. It kind of reminds me to make a recording on the things that I did. So it kind of creates a little bit of more of a feeling of presence and that you know what you're up to.
Mhm.
Yeah, so when I do interrupt myself, I notice sometimes like, okay, so that thing reminds me that I interrupted myself because I got away from the thing that I was supposed to be doing. But let's get back to your fancy little cube. So what does that do?
The fancy little cube. And so Timular is a very similar, I guess you can say, tool to Rescue Time. And it allows me to flip it on various sides to determine what I'm doing now and then track my time based on that. And what I've found is because, look, for a lot of people, uh, they don't need the technology, they don't need the supplements, they don't need the the food, etc. They already have good ideas, but most people need a technology or a tool, if you will, to help them really adhere to doing this. And so when you're first getting started in time management, it's, I mean, Drucker said this himself, it's very necessary to actually track your actual time. And so frankly, whether it's rescue time or the time you are, both of them are great to really just tell you where your time goes. And that's where you can start making changes.
Right. So um, I want to actually play an insert by our friend Siim Land.
Good old Sim.
Yeah. So let's play a little insert on the Eisenhower matrix. This is a pretty simple technique how people can figure out what is urgent and what really matters in terms of doing things, and we can have a little chat on that.
In a 1954 speech, the US President Dwight Eisenhower said, "I have two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent." That was his most fundamental principle of time management. Important tasks are activities that yield outcomes that lead us to achieving our goals. Urgent tasks require our immediate attention because of the consequences are also immediate. Think of them as the difference between having a fire in your kitchen versus making a fire in the fireplace. Urgent things force you to put out that fire as soon as possible, but it's still important to stoke the furnace to heat up the house. Here is the Eisenhower's principle of time management in order of importance. Number 1, urgent and important. Do it now. This is the point where you yourself have caught on fire and you need to put it off immediately. These are crises, deadlines, and other pressing problems right in your face. Number 2, important but not urgent. These are the activities that contribute to your greater goals. This is where you want to spend the majority of your time, improving yourself, strategizing, thinking of ways how to become more effective, etc. Number 3, urgent but not important. This quadrant includes all of the distractions, interruptions, and meetings of other people that don't contribute toward your achievements or your goals. Number 4, not urgent and not important. This is the final quadrant that is equally as essential as the first one. It's not about how much important stuff you do if you still continue to do the unimportant ones. These activities include procrastination, checking social media, watching TV, or any other distraction. If you value your time and want to reach your potential, then you have to ruthlessly cut these things off. These principles of time management already will set your priorities straight and allow you to determine the tasks that are most important to you.
So there you have it, the Eisenhower matrix. So many great leaders, including former US presidents and probably all many other countries, they are running a really tight schedule. If you think of your time, half of your day goes into just maintenance of being alive. So you sleep and you eat and you do other forms of recovery, and or even more actually. And then you do your work. If you take your work day, if you have 8 hours, you're not going to be productive for the full 8 hours. So Pomodoro technique is great for kind of making sure that you focus on things and getting things done. With David Allen's work is great for thinking about how you structure your work and put them into buckets and organize them based on context. But also when it comes to figuring out what you should be doing, what should you delegate, I guess many leaders, many managers are very easily drawn towards becoming micromanagers. So they do things that they shouldn't be doing. They don't delegate. They take the low hanging fruit instead of attacking the big problems first. Now, using a technique like that makes you reflect on the things that are actually really important and necessary to get done, and it prioritizes your unique input and capability, where you start to reflect who else is better at doing a certain task instead of you. Now, that's a simple technique. Have you personally used the Eisenhower matrix or any other form of kind of reflecting in terms of what should you be doing?
Sure. So if you look at, there's predominantly two things that I use in my everyday life to make sure I'm prioritizing and to make sure I'm getting the right things done. Because after all, if you're just getting things done, is that really useful? Because you can get things done on social media, and that's not going to be the most effective way to spend your time. And the two strategies that I use, one are objectives and key results. And then the second one, and that predominantly is more of a goal setting exercise so that I manage my quarters as to what I need to get done in order to achieve certain goals. And then the second thing is a point of reflection that I like to take every day. And Gary Keller actually wrote an entire book about this, but it's essentially the book's called The One Thing. And the idea is how do I identify, or really how do I focus on that one thing to just really the one thing that matters most, that adds leverage, and maybe either makes the rest of the things not matter or makes the rest of the things easier. And so when we look at those two in combination, the objectives and key results kind of narrow my frame as to what needs to get done. And you can see there's an entire book on that called Measure What Matters by John Doerr, who's actually a very famous venture capitalist in California. And it's implemented in institutions like Google, but also the one thing is just a way to focus every single day on what is that Pomodoro, that deep work session going to be about. What are you going to accomplish that is going to make the most difference in your life?
I've used something called the productivity planner. So people
Mm-hmm.
can Google on the productivity planner. It's basically a method through which you can think about the one thing that you should be doing, or the 3 top things for that day. And the way how you think about your day is, instead of looking at your full to-do list and thinking like, oh, which part I'm going to be starting like diving, into, you instead you take a break in the morning and you think about what is really essential to be done today. So what are, for example, the 3 things that I should be doing that would give me the greatest leverage for this day in terms of happiness and getting the results for the week. And it also helps you to reflect on not just for that day, but for that week and for that month or
Mm-hmm.
quarter or maybe a year. So that you have like 3 big goals for the year, 3 big things for the month, 3 big things for that week, and 3 big things for that particular day that all drive you towards that bigger goal for that year. So it kind of helps you to pay attention to the things that are most important. And it also, uh, in terms of time management, people tend to over or underestimate how long it takes to do something. And it's part of the training of using a productivity planner is that you become better and more accurate in estimating how long it takes to do something. Because before you start doing it, you estimate how long it's going to take in blocks of Pomodoros, so in 20-minute blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, once you complete the task, you write down how many blocks it actually took. And if you do that over and over again, you become better at first at splitting up your big task. Instead of it being like 4 hours, you're going to take the one big thing to be maybe 4 Pomodoros, like 20-minute
Mm-hmm.
chunks. And in the end, you also become better at estimating how long it's going to take. So you become more conscious about how to break things down, how to estimate how long they take, and also you become more conscious about attacking the most important things first. And in the evening, when you reflect back on that day, uh, you can be grateful for achieving at least one thing on that list.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a lot of things to do, that's one easy way. So you basically filter down your already filtered to-do list of all the possible things that you can do to the 3 things that are actually on your to-do list for that day.
Absolutely. And you take it up, fold it into a paper, and you put it in your pocket, and that's what you focus on for the day. That
Yeah,
way you can remain offline as much as possible.
yeah.
It's amazing, Temu. You nailed it on the head. We as a society are very good at visionary thinking, but taking visionary thinking and going into action is another thing. And what's interesting about a lot of these dreams that we have, a lot of these actions that we have, is that by doing the additional research and trying to boil it down into what actually needs to get done, it can become a very useful tool. And we can actually take something like, hey, I want to be a millionaire, and boil that down into just little itty bitty steps and allow us to really just determine, okay, how many phone calls do we need to make the next day if I want to be a millionaire in 3 years? And all that takes is really dedication, focus, and thinking.
Right. So, um, one question that I have in terms of the external brain is that, okay, so now we have recorded down, we have made explicit, we have externalized the things that we should be doing. Now, if that's the case, are there some tools that you would recommend that would then actually make your external brain run itself? So basically doing the tasks that are on that list that you shouldn't be doing. So do you use something to automate the things, or someone else to split things up? Do you use human or non-human appliances there? So kind of thinking about the external brain, how it actually starts doing things instead of just being a hard drive where you put things.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about the second aspect of the external brain, which is how do we create leverage from this? And I'm going to talk about one that is a little bit manual to start, but then I'll get into some of those tools that we can use to create leverage through APIs and other things. But the external brain itself is, once you've emptied your to-do list, hopefully you've now created some mind space to start thinking a little bit differently. And so when we start thinking a little bit differently and start looking about how to build differently and think differently in order to create leverage in our lives, that requires looking at production a little bit differently as well. And so when we're delivering something to a client or to a business partner or something, traditionally it's thought of as, okay, I'm going to deliver you some sort of final product, and that's the only thing. But what if we kind of flip this on its head and started thinking in terms of components? So rather than building sort of a presentation, a keynote presentation, I know you give quite a lot of them, Teemu. Rather than building a keynote presentation, focus on that next slide, that next section of slides, that whole deck, and focus on it in terms of components. And so by building into components, you now have created some sort of momentum, which creates positivity, frankly, and allows you to realize that these components are leverageable and they are evergreen, so that once they are done, you're not just using it for this one final end product. What you're actually doing is producing something that can be used 10, 100 times over. And so component thinking is really how we make that external brain very, very useful. And a lot more of the details of how to do this I'll cover in the presentation in Helsinki. But to answer your other question, which is one about how to get some of these to-dos done sort of automatically, there's other tools out there like Zapier, and you mentioned the integrations of Todoist. It's a great one. You get IFT as well. And those connect you to other apps. So for instance, my Pocket highlights go straight into Evernote. My reading, I can do Web Clipper with Evernote and it'll go right in there. You can use Notion as well, of course. But using a lot of these tools to automate those tasks is very possible.
Right. So if you take something like Zapier, so Zapier is basically an API that a web-based tool that you can use to take in, for example, the Todoist items, and you can filter them out based on, for example, if you put a specific category, it will trigger something else to happen. So one thing that you can use Zapier for is to delegate. So when you put something on your to-do list, Zapier will send an email with the content of the to-do item to someone, like your virtual assistant or your team member, etc. Or it could go into some system that then basically triggers automated scripts and functions around that. So automating as much as you can of your work, there is there's this idea that you should, in terms of your work, you should automate. You should outsource all the things that are something that either machines or other humans can do. If you can't outsource those, you automate them in some way, so that there is as little manual work necessary to do. Now, if there is manual work needed, then you optimize. So you optimize the manual work that you need to do in such a way. Let's say if you need to process a lot of images, you first automate some pre-processing, and then you create, let's say, some structures or a sequence of items that you need to do in terms of getting every single image into a state where you need them to be. So you have a process around that. So you optimize the process itself. And often through the process of outsourcing and automating and optimizing, you figure out that a lot of things can, in the end, be done by someone else but you. And as humans, we are kind of selfish. We think that we are the best person doing something, or that it might take too long to outsource something. So when you do something over and over again, repeatedly, that's when you should start thinking like, is it really, does it really take more time to outsource instead of you actually doing it? So when there is repetitive tasks, you can definitely do that. When there's complex cognitive tasks that you know that a better person, let's say it's a bookkeeping related task, so a bookkeeper would probably be able to figure it out, you can easily automate and outsource also those things. Now, do you use something else than Zapier? Do you use like virtual assistants and maybe some other
Yeah, sure.
tools?
Of course. In terms of virtual assistants, we use Magic quite a bit. We use a number of different programs. I mean, I mentioned IFT earlier, which is effectively the same thing as Zapier, but we use, similar to you, Process Street, which allows us to run through processes very fast, whether that be getting it delegated to a virtual assistant, getting it delegated to some member of the team. But Process Street allows us to document processes and then really seek to optimize those processes. That really, with the objective there, with any process, is how do we get the right person doing it? And how do we get them doing it as fast as possible?
Right. I also have used Fancy Hands, and I'm trying to remember now which one I also use. Anyway, so I've also used 99 Things.
Yeah.
I've used also Upwork.com. It's
Yeah,
great
and
for, yeah.
we use things like I mean, if we're starting to talk about design and everything, we use Design Pickle for all of our design needs, and we can get the idea of geographic arbitrage is a brilliant one. And so if we're able to outsource a lot of our business needs to somewhere else that's a little bit cheaper and allow our people to focus on what is core and good to them, then we're able to really perform at our absolute best. So going back to that analogy of really looking at bandwidth poverty and just saying, how do we remove bandwidth poverty? Well, it's getting people in the right position to do what they want to do and are best at. And so when we're able to remove those distractions, that bandwidth poverty is no longer an issue.
Right. Okay. So we have covered a lot of ground here, and we touched some technologies, some processes, a way of thinking about these things. You also spoke about knowledge warehouse. That how do you kind of capture things, build a warehouse, maybe do it searchable, whatever. Like, do you use some other tools like that through which you kind of track everything you've done that makes it searchable? Do you have like something in there for that external brain that you can kind of look into if you need to?
Sure. So one element that we haven't really spent too much about is really how do we build that knowledge warehouse and what is that knowledge warehouse? So in terms of tools, there's plenty of them out there, but the one I use is Evernote. There's also Notion, Bear, and a few others. And so what you're looking at in terms of your tools there is something that allows you to have a web clipper, for instance. But also, what I like about Evernote, and the only reason why I haven't switched to Notion yet, and Notion guys, if you're listening to this one's for you. If with Evernote, you can forward emails to your Evernote, and you can have it stored there. But what Evernote is it has OCR function, which allows us to recognize text within documents. It allows us to recognize text within different elements. And if we can keep that organized, a la similar to our to-do list, what we're able to do with Evernote is to create really synergistic elements of work. And so as we're developing these different pieces, these different components, we'll be able to search for these components, but also be able to see related components to that. And that's where we're able to really kind of get that pattern recognition and that search function in Evernote. And you're able to use these things in terms of components to build much faster.
Right. So I've used some tools to search everything more effectively, including everything that I ever checked online. And I remember that the name is Atlas. So Atlas, at least it runs on Mac. It kind of indexes everything on your system and also everything you ever saw, and it makes it all searchable. So I know also that in the quantified self community, people have some document cameras that they carry with them that is maybe taking a photograph every minute,
Yeah.
and it
I
makes
mean,
and then they search basically their life, what they saw. And the future, where do you see this going? Like, we are capturing what we do, we are capturing our output, we are capturing our input, and basically our whole life becomes like a virtual searchable database. It's kind of scary also, because you're a walking big brother that records everything that you see and hear and do. So being around you means being potentially recorded in one way. And so, I mean, that's already happening. If I send emails to you, or if I'm sending you a Facebook message or a WhatsApp message, like, all those things will be in a database and searchable from your context. So what used to be private is now becoming analyzed by computers, and potentially also public if we get some data breaches. So are you not worried about the extent of privacy concerns around all these different sensors and tools and trackers and APIs that are, circling around potentially some of the secrets of your business that will be momentarily exposed to external systems that can be hacked also?
of course, that's a concern, but I think in this day and age, how do I handle this question properly? Personally, my own privacy, I know that it's because I have, for instance, a Facebook account or an Instagram account, a lot of my privacy is somewhat compromised. That's personal privacy. Now, when it comes to work privacy, it's tantamount and of key importance to me. And so when it comes to security, of course, you have to select, best of breed softwares in terms of security. You have to change your passwords regularly. But yes, of course, it's a concern. It's something that I think about quite a bit. We deal with a lot of sensitive data, and how to make sure that that data is stored securely and not available to the highest bidder is something that I think about quite a lot.
Yeah.
There are
especially
areas that concern me.
Yeah, especially when we
definitely.
start working on APIs and we are using external services. I like what they do in military. So there's different classifications for information. That there are low levels of classification, and then there's higher levels. And the very highest is basically that you're doing that on a computer that's not connected to anything else, and it's in a separate room even. But in the end, like, we live in an extremely connected world, and I'm an optimist when it comes to the use of this information. So from a few perspectives, so that there are not really that huge secrets. So instead of making everything extremely private as a default, what Facebook has taught us is that they are making things more open by default, and then you choose the things that are more private. And so in the future, it definitely requires more attention to the question like, is this something that could be used by external parties in a wrong way? Now, now that's a discussion we definitely can have on this podcast with an expert on this field. But it's good to remember that once you start automating things, once you start giving access to human or non-human appliances that are external to you, that are basically distributing your work, you're also distributing some of the things that we considered private in a previous world. And that is definitely something that we have to pay attention to, that we are kind of going back to a tribal society where everyone knows everyone else's stuff, and we are together in this game of keeping the tribe alive. Now, the concern here is that not all parties know who this information is being exposed to, because, I mean, it's not just the tribe members, it's all kinds of other tribes that get access to these things. So we live in an extremely interesting world when it comes to this external brain. And the more we use things like mobile phones and different web apps and mobile apps and APIs and cloud services to analyze our data, we're basically making the world more transparent. We're making it more open and also potentially more easy to compromise things that we considered private previously. Now, in exchange for better productivity, I guess that's kind of what it is. If you want better productivity, you want to speed up tasks and all that, certain degree will compromise some of the things that we considered to be privacy. Now, that's another philosophical topic. And I know, I'm very aware that we're kind of running into the end of the show. And I don't want to, end on a kind of a skeptical or negative high point. I wanna kind of jump into some of the promising things. So with all the things that you've done to optimize your productivity and performance by using all these tools and technologies to split your tasks and outsource them and automate them, like, what is your advice if someone wants to start from somewhere? What are the books that they should check out? What are the apps that they should perhaps download? And what are perhaps the methods that they should consider? So we mentioned a few of them, but we can summarize them, or if you have something else, bring it up.
Yeah, sure. So Effective Executive is where I would start, because that's a great one in terms of time management. That's by Peter Drucker. Getting Things Done by David Allen is a great book as well. I like Measure What Matters by John Doerr, and The One Thing by Gary Keller. A lot of the other things that we've discussed today in terms of the Eisenhower matrix and those things, there's websites out there that can explain those to you. In terms of the technology, I think it's getting yourself a to-do list that you are very comfortable with actually using and using on an ongoing basis. The way that these things work and the way that people like yourself, Teemu, are able to continue to use them effectively over time is by getting continued use. So finding a to-do list that you like, that you enjoy, is somewhere where I would start. If you're looking to block out distractions, things like Freedom are a great way to block out distractions on the internet. We're looking at also technologies like Brain FM, which actually, I gotta say, Teemu, you actually turned me on to that on my podcast about 1.5 years ago, which allows you to focus by just simply giving you music in your ears. Then looking at, in terms of measuring time, Timular, Rescue Time, there's numerous other technologies out there, but I think that's enough to get people started.
Absolutely. And if people want to learn more about your work, obviously they can come over to Biohackers Summit. It will be the 1st and 2nd of November. You're going to give out your best performance so far in terms of how to optimize your productivity live on stage. And I mean, if you can join in person in Helsinki, you can also register for the live stream at biohackersummit.com. Check that out. But I definitely recommend people coming over, because 2 days of just amazing content, not just Boomer, but many others like Max Lugauer, Anthony DiClemente, Molly Maloof, even Mad Ventures, and the Biohackers Handbook authors will be there. So if you are into optimizing your day and your work day and getting the most out of it in terms of health, performance, and well-being, Boomer is going to be there. Now, if people want to learn more about you, Boomer, and your work, maybe reach out to you, where should they go?
Absolutely. The best place to reach me is decodingsuperhuman.com. That's the website. But also you can get us on Instagram. We're most active on LinkedIn, and you can find us there.
Right on. And there is an interview that you did with me on your podcast. So if people search for the Decoding Superhuman podcast and Teemu Arina, they will find also the interview where we also discussed Brain.fm. Now, with that, thank you very much for coming to the show. And I'm really looking forward to meeting you in Helsinki, Finland this autumn.
Teemu. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Have an amazing weekend, you and rest of our viewers online, and have an extremely productive, healthy rest of the week and weekend. See you later.